Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Dave Keating. I'm a journalist based in Brussels, and I'm going to be guiding us through today's discussion. Now, in this event from the European Federation of Pharmaceutical Industries and Associations, we're going to be answering everything you ever wanted to know about drug shortages, but were too afraid to ask. Obviously, this discussion is being prompted by the coronavirus pandemic and the major concerns that were raised about access to medical supplies during the most chaotic phase of the crisis in the spring. Now, since then, concerns have subsided, but the problems are no less real. So we're going to look at the situation before and after the coronavirus crisis to try to figure out where the bottlenecks exist and what's causing them. Now, we saw that those supply shocks in the spring with temporary trade restrictions and shortages of pharmaceuticals and medical supplies resulted in a big focus here in the EU on the idea of reshoring. That's the idea of reshoring, bringing back production of essential supplies back into Europe. And that's really the context of political focus that these supply chains will be existing in as we come out of this pandemic over the coming year. Now, some say these concerns are being driven by economic nationalism and exacerbated by the US-China trade war. Others say the crisis has exposed the dangerous dependence Europe has on foreign production. Now, we know a lot of things are going to change as a result of this virus, but some things will not change. Consumers will still want low prices, perhaps now more than ever as we enter a recession. They also want their medicine as quickly as possible. At the same time, the pressure to maximize efficiency in a recession will be intense. So all of this that we're talking about today will be the focus of the upcoming pharmaceutical strategy for Europe that's going to be coming from the European Commission. So here we're going to talk about what exactly these supply bottlenecks are, what's causing them, and what's the best policy and business solution to figuring out how to tackle them. Now, before we get going, a few housekeeping notes. You guys will be able to ask your own questions to our speakers today. To do that, you can use the Q&A feature at the bottom of Zoom. You just type in your question, I'll see them, and at the end of our panel, I'm going to be asking your questions to the panelists. Now, make sure to keep only questions in that box. I'm the only one who can see them. If you want to make a statement, feel free to use the chat feature, and that is visible to everyone, all the participants as well. Now, you can also engage with this event on social media using the hashtag #QuestionsInspireSolutions. You can see there on the bottom of your screen. And for clarity, I should note that the purpose of this webinar is not to address questions about any specific products. It's a general discussion about supply shortages. So any questions about specific products, I'm afraid I won't be able to ask the panel. So let's get started. Let's first hear some introductory remarks from today's speakers. We'll start with Christopher Schmidt. He's Executive Director and Head of the Strategy Realization Office at the German multinational Merck. Christopher?
Thank you very much, Dave. Just apologies. We have two Christophers in the company. I'm the other one. So I'm the Senior Director for the supply network operations in Europe, Middle East, Africa, and Russia. And my dear colleague, Christopher Schmidt, is responsible actually for the Strategy Realization Office. So many thanks, Dave, for the introduction to this topic. And I would like to first express my sincere thanks that we have this opportunity in speaking a couple of minutes regarding how a pharmaceutical supply chain works in terms of planning and management. You know that this is a topic that is actually very high on the agenda of the European Commission, and the pandemic during the last couple of months has shown once more that what we are doing as a manufacturer and the pharmaceutical industry is very, very important in the fight against the pandemic. But as well, at the same time, with all the restrictions that we have seen, that we still see, is it's very, very important to have and guarantee a stable supply chain of pharmaceutical products. So what I try to do is nearly kind of a mission impossible in the next couple of minutes, is to just explain a little bit to the audience how does it work? How does it generally work? Because we understand as well that it is sometimes a little bit complicated, specifically for people that are obviously not dealing with these kind of topics on a day-to-day basis. We thought it might be of interest that we speak very, very generally, how does it work, a pharmaceutical supply chain, and then probably speak a bit about shortages, why they appear, in order as well to set the baseline that we're all speaking about the same thing. So you might know or imagine that medicine supply chain is very, very complex. I remember when I started my career roughly 15 years ago with Merck and in supply chain, in one of those lessons that you get taught, I was told that a medicinal product is not like a fast-moving product like a shampoo or whatsoever, where you can basically go in the morning into the manufacturing side and say, let's change the color of the shampoo from red to green, and everything will be done by the afternoon. Actually, with pharmaceutical products, it's much more complicated. And our challenge is really to get the right products at the right location, at the right time, right quality, right amount, with the right documents. And let me tell you this, and I'm pretty sure that this is going to apply as well for all of the pharmaceutical companies that are present and that are represented by FBR, is our primary goal is a 100% customer service level. And if we in Merck speak about 100% customer service level, we mean no out of stock. That means we don't want to create any situation where a patient at the end of the day is in the situation that he or she is not able to get his medicines. And I think here already we have to make one of the first clarifications in terms of definitions. When we speak as a pharmaceutical company of a stock out, then most of the time we would not speak at a stock out of a patient level, because we as a pharmaceutical company are not delivering directly in most of the cases to the patient, but to wholesalers or to distributors. So our primary goal is to serve wholesalers, distributors, hospitals, and guarantee a 100% customer service level. If you wish to go to the next slide, and everything, and I will repeat this in a couple of minutes again, everything is about forecasting. We speak in our terms about demand planning. So we have to start way before a demand actually happens in the market, where we have to think about certain things like how much of a specific product do we want to deliver, do we want to plan, we have to think about when and where. In the case of Merck, we have more than 20,000 products or stock keeping units, as we call it, that we have to plan. And then it's not just you speak about a box, you speak about how many pills, how many packs. We speak about APIs, about drums, about bulk, finished products. We have to speak in a global supply chain about, is it for a specific country? Is it for a specific region? When is it? Next week, next year? Is there a tender? Is it for sampling? So there's a lot of forecasting that we have to do, and it starts actually way before a demand is happening in the country. Next slide, please. This is as well one of the key understandings and messages that I would like to keep you with. Is it's very simple actually. If there is no demand forecast, there is no supply. The better my forecast is, obviously the less stockouts I have and the less supply risks I face in the market. At the same time, a poor demand forecast is as well equivalent with a poor supply. And in our industry, one of the key performance indicators is forecast accuracy. I can speak only for my company. We have forecast accuracies that are very high. So we believe that we already have a quite good knowledge about what do we have to produce, when do we have to produce. Nevertheless, there is factors that are influencing our forecasts. And it's sometimes a little bit like looking into a crystal ball. where we have to make assumptions like, do we know the inventories of our customers? Do we know what kind of market signals we have in the markets? Is there business intelligence data available? And how do we interpret these kind of signals that we get? On top of this, we have seasonal demands. And if you want to consider as well the pandemic that is occurring just right now, how difficult it is for us to forecast certain pharmaceutical production, you might imagine that sometimes this is just more than a challenge. But bottom line, it's everything about forecasting and to have the right forecasts to be able to produce the right quantities that we want to deliver to our customers. Next slide, please. Yeah, I don't want to bore you too much with this slide. It's a typical textbook slide, but here you see the whole panorama of a supply chain, of a pharmaceutical supply chain. It starts everything with kind of, you have to plan your materials, then you have to manufacture them, distribute them. At the same time, you have a demand planning that I just referred to, and everything starts all over again. And in the meantime, you have to produce, transport, and have specific flows for the product, for the information, and for the financial flow. And if you want to go to the next slide to make it even a bit more complicated, our planning horizon is typically 24 months. So when sometimes we see in the news that there is the complaints that pharmaceutical manufacturers are not able to produce certain products from one day to the other, and we see it right now as well with the vaccines production that we hopefully will get very soon for COVID-19. These are things that have to be planned very well in advance. And the pharmaceutical product is consisting of many, many small, sometimes very, very small items like an excipient. We have the active pharmaceutical ingredient, we have a packaging, we have sometimes a label, a barcode to put on it. So bottom line, when we speak about making the right plans to manufacture pharmaceutical products, we speak about a horizon of 24 months. And that is actually what we're doing on a day-to-day basis, trying to understand for each and every product what could be a possible demand in 2 years from today on, and to start planning everything which is around this demand that we're forecasting for the next 2 years. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is just one of the examples as well to see a bit the complexity of all the specific parts that come together when we speak about just producing, let's say, one pack of tablets. It's not even taking into consideration here how complicated or complex it is to manufacture biotech products. Here you basically see we want to produce a finished product, which could be a pack of 10 tablets. Sometimes we even include multiple sources in the manufacturing process. So sometimes not all of the pharmaceutical product gets produced at one slot or at one plant. Sometimes we have specific sources for our API production, for excipients, and for the granulation process. Another plant then probably is doing the quality control, the coating. So these are the nice flavors and colors that you're putting on a tablet, then the pressing. And then it could be that another plant is actually blistering everything, putting the leaflet into it and release it within the European Union. So all of this is a process that that can create at each and every step can create bottlenecks, and that each and every of those steps has as well their lead times for you to see that sometimes a quality control, for instance, can take a couple of days and is not something that we can do from one moment to the other. As well, we at Merck at least would like to stress that excipients are usually as well not produced by a manufacturer or a pharmaceutical manufacturer itself. So here you are relying very often on suppliers that are supplying this very specific pharmaceutical ingredient for you, and that we as a pharma manufacturer basically we focus on these steps that I have shown here on this slide, and that excipients actually are most of the time coming from third-party suppliers. Next slide, please. Yeah, then we have to look about the shortage risks and actually once more the lead times. So what kind of parameters do we actually include? Because that was a question as well that we discussed very, very often. How long does it take to produce, ship a product to the customer? And globally speaking, at least for my company, just if you look at the transportation and shipping mode, it can sometimes take up 2 to 9 weeks, depending on if you ship something by boat, by truck, or by airplane to a final customer. And every step that you see here, like quality, safety stocks, or the desired inventory that we want to have at the customer level as well, are playing a very, very important role when we plan our manufacturing and when we plan our shipments to the customers. So what do we do as a manufacturer? I mean, in general, we try to be as fast as possible, and we are executing as fast as possible in order to resolve shortages. Actually, we at Merck, we don't even call it shortages, we call it late supplied orders, because we start way before a stock out. But we as a manufacturer, we need as well supporting policies that enable us a bit to quickly reply and address critical shortages. I'm pretty sure that we're going to have a discussion now in the Q&A and as well in the next couple of minutes with the other presenters. We need a kind of support from policymakers in order to, as fast as possible, react and address critical shortages in the market. Next slide, please. And with this one, actually, I would like to close my short presentation. I tried to scribble down a little bit what are kind of factors that are sometimes hindering us or preventing us in our ability to prevent shortages. I don't want to read out all of those reasons, but you can see there's a lot of reasons why we sometimes have to deal with shortages. It is very often not able to just bring it down to one very specific item. There can be a lot of reasons. And internally, as a manufacturer, we obviously are working on all of them. If you want to mention one, like in manufacturing delays, these are things that we internally can control and can support and try to abandon. But in the outside world, we need help, and we need help from politicians, from institutions, from authorities. And that's why, once more, I'm very happy to have this possibility here to speak a little bit about that and to probably create a little bit of awareness of the work that we're doing. And at this point in time, Dave, I think that's what I wanted to show. And let me know if you have any additional questions. Thank you.
Great, thanks a lot, Christopher. That's really helpful to be able to visualize the different parts of the chain there. And you've walked us through the stages where shortages happen. But what would you say is the essential reason that shortages happen? What's the root cause of these shortages?
Yeah, you know, that's a very, it's not a straight answer that I can give you here. There is a lot of reasons why shortages can actually happen. I think we have to distinguish a little bit between manufacturing processes and supply chain processes. In manufacturing, there's a lot of things that can go wrong. It can be that quality is not the required quality. We have to remember that within the European Union, we as pharmaceutical manufacturers, I think we have the highest quality standards around the globe. So everything that we do has to have the right quality. That's one of our primary mottos: quality first, right first time. So whenever something happens in quality during the manufacturing process, this could be a reason for a delay. We face as well supply disruptions from API, excipient suppliers. I tried to mention that everything is around the forecast. Do we have the right forecast? Sometimes we don't have a forecasted demand, then it gets even more complicated. And then when we speak specifically about the supply chain, so once a product is produced, we're dealing with topics around parallel exports, that we have parallel traders that are taking away certain products and moving it to another country and basically reducing the possibility for the customer to take over the product and to use it. We are facing logistical bottlenecks at distributor level, wholesaler level, pharmacies. We have seen it during the pandemic. Borders have been shut down. Export bans by some countries have been issued. And actually, and that's a little bit frustrating for us. Very often, it seems to be there is a shortage in a specific product or for a specific product in a specific country, but product is available in the supply chain. It just doesn't get to the end customer because of all the various reasons that I tried to mention before. So overall, there is no straight answer to why do bottlenecks happen along the supply chain.
As a quick follow-up, I was wondering during your presentation, I mean, is there a common understanding of what we're actually talking about when we say shortages? Is there a commonly accepted definition of what a shortage is?
Yeah, I mean, it's a very good question, actually, and I think you're putting it a little bit down to the point of where we have to say that there is no really a common definition of shortages. And I think, and my colleagues, we think and we believe that this is actually, it's needed. We need to find a solution to speak about the same thing, because it does not always mean the same thing when we speak about shortages. And I know that together with my colleagues and FBR, we're trying to call very strongly for a harmonized definition of what a shortage actually means, and that this could have serious risks related to patients that are affected if they are not having their products. We should actually base our shortage definition based really on patients' needs, and not on the needs that probably are addressed by wholesalers, by parallel exporters, or by whatever player in the market. We should really focus on patients' needs at a national level. And this will help us as the companies, as well, the national agency and the policymakers, really to focus on the relevant risks and the risks that are incurring related to a shortage. For all of this, I think we will have to focus more in the future on the demand status and get much more forecast transparency in order to make this all work.
Great. Well, thanks for walking us through those planning and management aspects. Let's turn to Lucas Fischer next, who can tell us a little bit more about the specific. We're talking about ensuring resilient supply during a pandemic. Now, Lucas is head of supply chain management for Europe at the Swiss multinational Novartis. Lucas, take it away.
Thank you, Dave. So I'm trying to give some more insights now of our experience during the past months during the pandemic. Back in December 2019, with the first reports of the corona outbreaks in China, Novartis has assessed possible supply restrictions. Although we don't have our own production facilities in the Hubei province, we checked potential impacts from our suppliers' network and ensured that we have the required safety stock levels in place. Novartis has two different portfolios. One is the innovative medicines and the generics. The generics are sold through our Sandoz division. I'm heading the supply chain for innovative medicines in region Europe. And my comments are related to the innovative products unless otherwise stated. So I wish to highlight that the generics market has a very different business dynamic effect, which is also has also direct impact on drug shortages. On the slide, you can see a high-level concept of our pandemic preparation plan, which has been activated back in December last year. Throughout the Corona crisis, our supply performance has remained stable. We did not experience shortages due to supply restrictions at Novartis. This is on one side due to an effective supply risk management, which principally is based on a dual sourcing and/or strategic stock keeping, while the stock is not kept only as a finished product in the country, but also on the level of drug product, of API, of excipients. So this is important that those stock levels are always in place. And on the other hand, we had business continuity plans in place in all the production sites and critical functions. Those business continuity plans passed the stress test of Corona. It needs to be stressed that the shortages of medical goods during COVID-19 were less caused by the collapse of supply chains, but by an unprecedented surge of demand. For some products, and here I refer mainly to intensive care units medicines, which are usually generics, the demand has increased. The demand increase has been real. Now, for our innovative medicines portfolio, the sharp demand increase that we have seen in March and in April was predominantly forward buying. In this case, it was important to allocate products in the market according to the real demand. For our molecules in clinical trial for COVID-19, we have immediately ramped up the production accordingly. So to summarize, 5 factors have been the key for success of the crisis at Novartis so far. First and foremost, the support to our people. Measures to keep all employees safe and also to foster collaboration between and within the sites. Secondly, a supply readiness. So proactive planning by having supply risk management and business continuity plans in place, and the task force was created at the beginning of the crisis. Third, supply diversity. Having a global footprint and wherever possible, dual sourcing. Fourth point, digital readiness, demand planning using predictive analytics, and also just the fact that people could work from home. And last but not least, from our side, very important, the collaboration with health authorities to avoid stockpiling behaviors in the countries. Now, if we can ask support from a policy point of view, I see this mainly in 3 areas. During a crisis, never hinder the trade between countries, lift any export bans. The green lanes that we've seen at the borders have been very helpful for our pharmaceutical products. Then discourage the stockpiling behavior during the crisis. And last but not least, in general, just limit the red tape where possible. That's it from my side. Back to you, Dave.
Thanks very much. Now, you've outlined, of course, Lucas, that you guys had business continuity planning in place before the crisis. I mean, did that business continuity planning pass the stress test in the crisis, and what lessons were learned during the crisis for when you guys are making that continuity planning going forward?
Actually, business continuity and the whole supply risk management has to be in place, obviously, before the crisis, and has to be initiated immediately at the start of it. So the big topic for our supply risk management is to avoid single sourcing where possible, then to have the correct inventory levels in place. And this needs to be there before the crisis starts. But then there are many less obvious things. Just the fact by having all employees or the office employees being able to work from home, not only for their emails and Zoom, but also for ERP connection. So this was an important fact. And very small details, such as proactively putting shift models in place with very small shifts with cells. So when the virus actually started to impact the sites, we could exchange those cells. Not the whole shift had to go on quarantine, but only the small cell. And this had to be done very proactively from the beginning, and that was thanks to our business continuity plans. They have been adjusted accordingly, inventory levels are being adjusted accordingly, but overall we can say that business continuity plan, supply risk management has helped the stress test here.
Thanks, Lucas. That's quite interesting. Let's turn next to two representatives from the American multinational Pfizer to tell us a little bit more about their vaccine supply planning and management. We have our Director of Global Quality Support, Simon White, and EMEA Customer Supply Chain Strategy Lead, Alberto Cifuentes. Simon, let's go to you first, if you're there.
Thank you, Dave. Yes. Do you hear me well?
Yes, we can hear you great.
Good. Thank you. I have had some technical difficulties today. Sorry about that. Good day, everyone. Unfortunately, I can't see you and you can't see me. I also can't see the screen, but we'll have a go. So thank you. Yeah, the focus now, let's turn to vaccine supply in particular, vaccine supply planning and management. Clearly, on a global level, our overall objective here is to ensure the well-being of patients. And in the case of COVID-19 in particular, what we've seen over the months is an opening of dialogue. I think in times of crisis, this shows how important collaboration is. And both manufacturers, marketing authorization holders, and governments, health authorities, freight forwarders, governments, humanitarian organizations, all those players in the supply chain have been working together from around March this year. All of this has been done with the aim of developing a range of vaccines. And I'll speak a little more specifically about COVID-19 vaccines, as this is where the attention obviously is. And what we've triggered with dialogue with the regulatory authorities is a level of flexibility of the approach, but never with any compromise to safety, efficacy, and quality of the products. And the intention is, as I said, a range of vaccines clearly is going to be more advantageous than a single vaccine. We hope there are several vaccines eventually. All the signs are that things are progressing well. Manufacturing actually has been triggered months ago at risk, and we'll come back to that, but with the same rigorous regulated processes that would apply to any medicines. So in this sense, there's no difference for vaccines in general. The key here, though, is that we clearly need an unprecedented volume in a short space of time. And while we've been developing manufacturing processes, we've also been, in parallel, looking at how are we going to supply and distribute that vaccine globally to ensure patient access. And the underlying basis to all of this is our continued commitment to scientific integrity and quality of the product, which is always our utmost priority. Let's go to the next slide, which I can't see, but we'll go through and I'll let my colleague Alberto introduce himself. If I cover the first couple of boxes there, R&D and manufacturing. What we've done differently, and this is an example of regulatory flexibility, the dialogue we've had with regulators, is to allow the clinical development of vaccines to happen on a rolling review basis. I think we heard earlier in October that our particular vaccine had entered the rolling review. This allows us to submit clinical data as and when it becomes available to the reviewers at the health authorities. I'm speaking particularly of the European Medicines Agency, rather than the normal practice, which would be to complete your entire development program, put your dossier together, and then submit for review. So we've been doing this on a sort of telescoped basis, which doesn't cut corners, it saves time. The other important aspect that this has demonstrated is the collaboration, not only with regulators, but also between companies. I think this is a clear indication in this particular crisis that no single organization can expect to do everything. And we've seen a lot of collaboration between pharmaceutical companies and biotech firms, or pharmaceutical companies between each other. Moving on to the manufacturing then, as I mentioned, it's already started. We need to build at risk, because we don't know if the vaccine under development will eventually be approved or not. So the manufacturing has been at risk. The building of inventory is also at risk. But it's clear here to point out that this is all done without any detriment to the normal manufacturing and distribution and supply of all medicines currently in our portfolio, as previous speakers have talked about. So we've been developing new facilities, dedicating new equipment, new production lines to the production of a new product, which we don't actually know for sure yet will eventually be approved. It's worth pointing out, if there are journalists who relay these messages, the fantastic work that's been done over the past month by those operators who've been keeping our manufacturing sites running over the months, day and night in many cases, to ramp up production to meet the increased demand because of the pandemic, not only of COVID-19 related treatments, but all the other medications that are required on a daily basis by patients around the world. And this brings us to the question of starting material availability, because of course, to manufacture, you need stock of starting materials available. If those can't be brought to your manufacturing site, you may trigger shortages down the line. So glass vials has been mentioned amongst other possibilities of a risk of constraint. With such a vast volume of finished product required, is there actually the volume of glass vials being manufactured? So while our operators were able to be classified as essential business so that they could get to their site of work, is that the same for operators in the glass manufacturing facilities? These are the kind of questions to be looked into. So reagents and other raw materials to start the manufacturing process, which previous speakers have mentioned, does have a particular lead time, especially when we're talking of biologics, biological processes, which can't be reduced in time. Another example of regulatory flexibility, and we've seen this come in the last weeks in Europe, is flexibility around the labeling requirements for the product. If we're facilitating the process by using multi-dose vials and multi-vial packs, a big logistical constraint in normal manufacturing, in routine, is making sure that the latest information leaflet is supplied with each pack. If that can be not bypassed, but simplified by, for example, making the leaflet downloadable at point of administration. This is a massive help to the logistical challenge of getting vast quantities of product distributed worldwide. Another aspect is the regulatory harmonization once the product is approved. And by the way, the signs are that we should have clinical data by the end of October, a potential decision by external expertise in the third week of November, and potentially that scaled up manufacturing, which has been going on in parallel, will by then already have stocks ready to be supplied. And an underlying issue here is to maintain a harmonization of the product in terms of its regulatory filing once it's approved, so that we don't get divergence and the need to manage stocks of different units for different markets. So the recognition of post-approval variations to the dossier is a key request for regulatory harmonization. The last point is security. Wherever there's a crisis and a need for a product, there will be unscrupulous elements of society willing to fill a gap. And so the use of a standard global trade identification number for every pack is a fundamental part of the process from manufacturing and through into supply. And at this point, let me hand over to my colleague Alberto to go into a bit more detail of the supply and distribution process. Thank you.
Great. Thanks, Simon. Alberto, you're up.
Yes, okay. Thank you very much, Simon, and hi, everyone. A pleasure to be here today. My name is Alberto Cifuentes. I am part of the global supply chain at Pfizer. And I'm going to talk you about the two remaining buckets in the slide, the supply planning and distribution in the scope of the vaccines. First important highlight I would like to share today as one important takeaway, is that we are in front of a highly orchestrated network. Christopher, in the earlier presentation, has clearly shown all the different steps. And when we are in front of vaccines, all those steps, always need to be strongly interconnected and what we call highly orchestrated. But in the case of a vaccine, is even more important, and the interdependency is really strong. And precisely to plan all of that properly, and also Christopher alluded to it earlier, we have robust processes to manage what is the demand forecast. The demand obviously is critical. It is telling us how much we need to produce. And to basically construct that demand forecast, we have quantitative processes and we have statistical tools that help us to learn about what could happen based on the history, the seasonality, and so on. But even more important, qualitative information, the medical commercial teams that are close to the doctors in the hospitals, close to the patients, understanding what the demand could be. Obviously, we are now in times of a pandemic and we know how the demand peaks could happen, but always we try to manage different ranges of forecasts, what could be in an eventual case of an increased peak, and we play always with inventory buffers. In all the steps of manufacturing, we put inventory buffers, additional safety prevention of a stock at all levels of manufacturing, but obviously very important in the finished packed product and ready to be used, in order to prevent that fluctuations in what we are preventing basically are well covered. And all of that in all those steps is very important to highlight that we have several key performance indicators for each of the different processes we need to track. So there is a rigorous and continuous tracking of all the steps in the manufacturing processes. But let me move to distribution. The distribution of a vaccine is different to other medicines, and not only for the things you see in the first bullet point, I mean, the temperature control, and sometimes, I mean, moving between minus 20 to even minus 80 degrees Celsius that we need to operate with all the global capacity at cargo. I mean, probably you all know that most of the medicines travel in commercial flights, and imagine now with the pandemic and the significantly reduction of the air traffic. I mean, obviously all those challenges are applying to vaccines and also to other medicines. But why also in the vaccines we have an additional element, and is to think on the vaccination in the logistics centers. I mean, so sorry, the vaccination centers and the logistics associated to it. How we need to think about the administration of the vaccine. We need to think on the syringes that require, needles. I mean, there are many elements that when we think on the distribution and logistics need to be in consideration and play important role. And I'm going to close with the last button important remark. I mean, in all the presenters earlier than me have alluded the importance of the collaboration. I don't want to finish, and this is the last slide that Simon and I put together, without a strong highlight that the cooperation between the different stakeholders, and I can allude to MAH, regulatory agencies, public health institutions, and the industry, manufacturers is really critical, is essential, and is for us one of the major highlights. And as Simon said, in times of crisis, there are a lot of things that happen that are incredible good learning, and I think the collaboration we are experiencing in these days is going even to the next level, which is really a good thing happening, and we are all moving things into a higher degree of collaboration to basically surpass the challenges that we have in front of us. And with this, Dave, I hand it over to you.
Thanks, Alberto. So there we've had it kind of the past, present, and future of potential shortages. We have the plans that were made before the pandemic, what happened in the pandemic, and then looking forward, how supply chain problems might exist with the spread of vaccines. So now let's move on to the panel discussion. I have a few questions for the panelists, and then I'll ask some of your questions that have already been coming in through the Q&A. Simon, I wanted to ask you a follow-up question about vaccines specifically. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk in public policy circles about what regulation needs to be in place. What do governments need to do to get ready for the development and distribution of a vaccine? In your mind, what measures would be best for Europe to take to ensure the effective and timely rollout of a COVID vaccine?
Yeah, that's a key question. And I would come back to the issue or the subject of regulatory flexibility, which we've already seen to some extent in some of the elements we've mentioned in the presentation so far. But I think this could be taken further. So, for example, the use of e-leaflets rather than paper would be a key example in terms of facilitating the process. I think anything that smoothens and makes easier what is already an enormous challenge is what we should be looking at. We need to avoid measures that add challenges to what is already an extremely, probably the greatest challenge we've had in healthcare. Let's be clear. So the sort of constructive partnering with other actors in the supply chain, whether it's air, sea, or road freight, the carriers to facilitate movement of goods and people, and the coordination with governments on the receiving end. I mean, in certain cases, we need to be sure that when the product leaves the manufacturing site, we know exactly what's going to be happening with it on arrival at its destination, not just at the seaport or airport, but on the ground transportation, the receipt at the clinic. There needs to be complete coordination of the process for administration of vaccine. So all regulatory flexibility moves are what we're looking for, and in dialogue with governments and regulators currently to facilitate that process.
I've got another policy question. This one is for Lucas and Christopher, and it's about what EU member states have been doing in response to some of the concerns that we had during the height of the pandemic and the most chaotic part. We're seeing some member states in the EU introducing mandatory stockpiling. Let me ask you, Lucas, do you think that mandatory stockpiling by member states is going to help prevent shortages?
It's a very important and interesting question. I think it was Christopher who mentioned that at Merck they are striving for 100% customer service level. I would say that's the ambition of all RX companies. We want to ensure that all the patients get their medicines. And for that, we are having all those plans and inventories in place. Now, we have to keep in mind that inventory comes at the cost. It comes at the cost not only of holding the inventory, but if we are having high level of inventory, we'll also have write-offs, for example, due to label changes. So that we have to keep in mind. Now, during the COVID crisis, companies have shown, and I'm not only referring to Novartis, that the supply chain from a supply point of view has been very stable, has not been interrupted. Where we had shortages of medicines was because of the huge spike in demand. Again, intensive care unit medicines were the most affected. For certain medicines, it might make sense to have a mandatory or compulsory stock in place. So that is possible that it's needed, but it has to be very clearly limited to products where we have this demand volatility, like anti-infectives, like painkillers, etc., which are used in the ICU. Now, another point is we have to be careful that we hold the stock not necessarily on a national level in country-specific units, but in a crisis like this, we should be able to exchange the medicines between the country and hold the safety stock on an EU level, not on a national level, so that we can ship the product into the market where it is needed. So those are some thoughts about it, but it's a very complex question.
Yeah, Christopher, what do you think about this stockpiling issue?
Yeah, actually, I think I can only agree with Lucas. I mean, first of all, I think we have to recognize that we are living in a union called the European Union. So if we would call for national stockpiling, then I think we would forget a little bit this solidarity impact that we would like to see as a union. And I don't think that national stockpiling is going to help the patients all over in the European Union. Actually, if you want to stockpile in one country, then you at the same time risk that all our manufacturing and supply chain plans are going to be interrupted, and at the same time is causing probably a shortage or a stock out in another country, which we obviously don't want. So what I think, rather than looking at a national level and a very non-union level, is that we should rather look from a holistic perspective into something like prevention plans. I mean, we have to clearly identify which are the medicines that are critical for our citizens, which are the ones that we have to have a very close look upon and that we probably need in times of crisis. And I think we would rather strive for some kind of improvement when it comes to regulatory flexibilities. I, as a pharmaceutical manufacturer, I would rather like to be able to move my product from a country A into a country B where it's needed, but probably due to regulatory reasons, I actually can't ship it or sell it because of missing marketing authorization, etc., etc. I think this would help the industry much more to have these kind of improved regulatory flexibilities rather than suggesting to nationally stockpile. And actually, I mean, everybody's complaining about it. We shouldn't stockpile things. I have seen in the Q&A there was as well a question about stockpiling. Should we stockpile at home? I don't think that it's a good idea to do so. It's not a very solidarity act to stockpile things, because you're taking basically away something that was supposed to be for someone else.
Yeah, that's an interesting point. Let's open it up to the questions from the audience. So that question that Christopher just mentioned is from Sebastian Horn. So he asks, should we enable patients to build a safety stock at home, in particular for life-saving essential medicines? Christopher, you don't seem to think that's a good idea. Alberto, let's go to you. Alberto, what do you think about this idea of allowing patients to stockpile?
Well, I mean, I think stockpiling I mean, as I alluded in my presentation, safety stocks are always there. I mean, so for all brands we manage in our company, we always plan for a concrete safety stock. And actually, we were discussing earlier on the forecast. I mean, the more unpredictable our forecast and our demand is, the more safety buffer we put on there. So actually, I will always look at us as manufacturers that we need to put there the buffer that is going to be required. So additional stockpilings, to be honest, I don't think are needed. What we need to make sure is that we always dimension the right safety stock, as we call it, to react to increasing demand. Obviously, when we are in front of a pandemic, as we are now, I know we are speaking about, I mean, what we have seen in the ICU medicines over the big peak in the first wave in March and April. Obviously, that's something we cannot plan for, but we were also reacting as faster as we could. So it's not only maybe the safety stock that you may say, okay, yeah, I mean, what happened if the demand goes above and then you are consuming your safety stock? What happened then? Okay, we are also trying for the brands we consider are medically critical products. We are obviously also putting in how agile we can be to react to in the shorter time frame, even with all the lead times that Christopher explained in his presentation. There are measurements and prevention that is also translated into more agile reaction that will enable us to react as quickly as possible. And that is all part of the planning of a drug. So to answer more precisely, I would say the stockpiling is at the manufacturing side responsibility, and we always look at, in one hand, the safety stocks, in the other hand, also how we can increase agility for the critical medicines that could even consume in a rapid manner because of different reasons our safety stock.
Well, we have a related question here that I want to put to Lucas.
Can I?
Yes. Yeah, Lucas,
can I just add something to this? Because I think the critical point is really the request for national stockpiling. This is when the governments ask for, we need so many months of safety stock, that's the critical part. Now, we have to keep the patient in the focus. I think we are all clear about that. So we had during the pandemic situations where doctors prescribed instead of 2 months medicine for 3 months or 4 months, so that the patients don't have to go every month to the doctor and ask for a new prescription. I think this is something we all can absolutely support. And with our normal safety stock and our business continuity plan, we have covered for that. I think this is very important. The problem becomes when governments ask, we need 6 months of this, or ask even people go to the pharmacy and get the coverage for 6 months, then it becomes a problem. But if it's within the normal, I would say, to protect the patient, I think that's something that can be absolutely supported with our plan.
And I suppose that a lot of that is going to involve communication with patients, which is the subject of the next question we have here. Let me put this to Christopher. Laura Cockram asks, how can patient organizations and pharma companies work together to improve communications to patients about shortage issues and work together to target policymakers to put in place solutions to address those issues?
Yeah, thanks. Very good question indeed. I mean, how can we work together with patient organizations? First of all, I think we will have to recognize that the information to patient is crucial. I mean, in general, nevertheless, we as a manufacturer, we are obliged to do that through local rules. And we cannot give medical information or product information directly to the patient. So we will have to speak and work together with patient organizations, and we will have to work together with the authorities and the clinicians. And patient groups can do this. They can speak to patients. I think it's a very important topic, but we will have to stay at the level of the local regulations, and we have to really clearly identify where can we influence and where should we not influence. Nevertheless, this is as well, it's not a supply topic as per se. I think this is then obviously more related to our colleagues that are in governmental affairs and that are working together with the medical colleagues that have to define better how should be the relationship together with the patient organizations.
Let's go next to a question from Sebastian Horn. I think, Simon, I'm going to put this question to you. So Sebastian asks, what do you think would be the impact on supply chain if countries like China or India were unable or much less able to supply API due to local COVID situations there? Simon, are you there? I think we're missing.
I'm here, but I I missed the question.
Okay, so this question is from Sebastian Horn. He asks, what do you think would be the impact on the supply chain if countries like China and India were unable or much less able to supply API due to the local COVID situations there?
Yeah. Okay, I think I've got it. If China and India and the likes weren't able to supply API due to COVID in their country, yeah, I think it depends on. I'm from quality, so I can say it depends as an answer. It depends on each company's supply chain setup. We, for one, and I know the FPM member companies, as generally the innovative R&D based companies, already use European API in a majority of the finished products that are on the market in Europe. We also export a lot of those finished products outside of Europe, by the way, but the API itself comes from Europe. So, you know, the vulnerability to a problem in China and India kind of depends on what your setup is. And we as the impact would be very low. In fact, I think I have a figure of 2% in mind of what comes from China in terms of APIs. We keep in mind we did see export restrictions out of India early in the pandemic, which did impact the availability of starting materials manufactured in India, APIs from India, as well as finished products from India, which weren't manufactured necessarily in Europe. So, you know, these were typically the high volume, low cost products such as generics. There could be, and I think this has been identified, you know, a potential weakness in supply in Europe of those generic products that rely on APIs from outside of Europe. So again, it depends on each particular company's setup and their sourcing strategy. But in general, the innovative part of the industry is not particularly reliant at all on non-EU sources of API.
Let me go for the question for Christopher. I think this is related to your presentation. His question is from Liz Breen. She asks, do you think that the medicine shortages reporting systems that are in operation now are effective in minimizing disruption to supply?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Let me try to phrase it. I mean, we as a manufacturer, we always obviously apply to the local regulation. And from my experience that I see within the European Union is that there is different regulators, obviously, in each and every country, and there is different regulations that are being applied. We were always reporting shortages in all of the member states according to the local regulations and laws. And what we specifically saw during the pandemic, or when everything started, is that the national governments or authorities are not 100% harmonized. So here, for instance, in Germany, I have to report critical medicines to our local authorities on a regular basis. So this is not something new to us. But the list of products is a complete different one that we would use in another country, or that probably EMA would use. And then I think at the beginning of, or I remember at the beginning of the pandemic, we were starting to report through EMA shortages for very specific APIs. And I had the impression that we're kind of doubling our efforts because things are already in place, but they're not harmonized. And I think it would be much better if in all of the member states in the European Union, we would have the same standard and the same list of identified products that we actually need to report, and where we have to have clarity what is needed to report. And probably at the same time to have this discussion again about what does it mean to have a shortage, because a shortage definitely shouldn't just be a shortage at a wholesaler level, but we have to take into consideration what happens at the patient level, what happens at the inventories of a pharmacy. Are we able to supply? And I think we need much more harmonization when it comes to reporting issues and definitions on what we actually have to have. And at the same time, that was as well a bit of my frustration, or our frustration, is that the tools that we use in order to capture these shortages were very time consuming, I must say. We had to struggle for weeks with formats and different files and archives, and it didn't help us in order to have a speedy and reliant reply to the organizations and the authorities within the European Union.
I have a next question here for Alberto. This question is coming from Philip Zweig. He says, are discussions on drug shortages in the EU ignoring the elephant in the room, a dysfunctional American supply chain? He says that evidence shows that the global shortages were made in the USA as a result of hospital group purchasing organizations. How would you respond to that, Alberto?
I couldn't get the second part. I mean, the line was breaking. Can you repeat, Dave? Sorry.
Yeah, sure. He says that the causes of supply chain disruptions coming from the United States are often ignored in EU discussions, particularly causes from hospital group purchasing organizations as supply chain middlemen in the US.
Well, I mean, what I can say, Dave, is that when we look at supply shortages, we look really, I mean, and here speaking from a Pfizer perspective as a global worldwide manufacturer, we always look completely. We look globally at our shortages, and it is not that we just isolate one or other region. I mean, we look at our entire supply chain, and we look at our global continuity of the product. It is true that obviously in the supply chain of our products, there are different.
I think we may have lost Alberto there. See if he comes back.
To hospitals.
Back. Alberto, are you with us?
Can you hear me?
Yes, you're back.
Okay, yeah, I mean, maybe the connection. Can you hear me now?
Yes, you're back now.
No, I was just saying that we look. So let me be very concrete. We look at the shortages globally, but it is important in this question in particular. I think it's important to highlight that obviously our products in the pharma industry go sometimes through wholesalers, sometimes going direct to hospitals, sometimes even can go direct to pharmacy, and even we could find products that have even direct delivery to the home of the patient. And in all those different channels, we have different situations when we are in front of a shortage. But I would really like to highlight that when we look at shortages, we look at the whole supply chain. We look at and to the patient. It's not just that we look things from our internal manufacturing perspective, and we like to look at all the steps in manufacturing and analyze the shortages. So I don't think there is always an interconnection, and we will need to really go into details of which brand and for what product are we.
Makes sense. Let's take
Dave,
yeah.
can I just,
Lucas, yeah.
I would like to quickly add two perspectives on just the last question now. The shortages during this pandemic were caused by the demand peak. That's by the demand spike. That was the reason. I don't think there was any intermediary or something responsible for that. I'm not referring now to other situations, but that was caused by the demand. Now, I just would like also to add to Christopher's comment before about local manufacturing and manufacturing in China and India. In Novartis, we have the generics divisions and the innovative medicines division. And innovative medicine is exactly how Christopher said. This is by and large produced in Europe. We have either dual sourcing or we have everything produced here in Europe. There is hardly anything coming out of China and India. There are issues with generics medicines because of the drop in price that basically all the manufacturing of the APIs is coming from those countries. And that is a risk, but that is due to price pressure. Some years ago, we had a situation with a drug substance called valsartan, where the manufacturers in China had quality issues, and that has led to a global shortage because they had 80% of the market.
Let me take this next question. We have a question that's come in specifically about the Commission's upcoming proposal. So Daphne Catrila asks, what is the opinion of the speakers with regards to the Commission's upcoming pharma strategy as a way to tackle shortages? Based on what you guys know so far in terms of what's being developed there, what's your take? Is it going to be a good strategy? Christopher?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I have not seen, or we have not seen a strategy yet. I mean, it's not adopted, so it's very difficult to have an opinion on this one. Nevertheless, I mean, what we would like to see when the strategy is being developed is that we would really call for a holistic approach. I mean, we have to focus on critical shortages, really the products that matter. And the policies that are part of the pharma strategy that is going to be developed, they should help us actually to better forecast and to get more transparency in the supply chain. So what we need is the pharmaceutical industry, we need a solution-oriented dialogue with agencies, with policymakers. We need more regulatory flexibility, and we would love to see these points considered in the development of the pharma strategy, which we understand is in the way of its development and adoption.
Simon, I have two questions here for you concerning vaccines. So Emily Fabra says specific RA asks were mentioned for vaccines. Should we aim to target to enlarge this to more products, the ones also more sensitive to shortages? And then another question on vaccines from Roland Vinzetti. He asks, do you see a risk for the vaccine distribution due to shortage of containers or dry ice, or due to high demand during the first wave of vaccine distribution around the world? So Simon, those two vaccine questions for you. You just want to unmute, Simon.
All right, sorry, do you see me and hear me now?
Yes, yep.
Great, thanks a lot. Yeah, so the first question.
Specific RA asks.
Yeah, that's right. I think we've seen with the the crisis this notion of flexibility in regulations, regulatory requirements, and I think one of the lessons learned from this pandemic is that yes, why would we not extend this to other products? If it makes sense, if there's no compromise to product quality, safety, and efficacy, if we can simplify regulatory processes, certainly, let's open the dialogue. Let's not over-regulate if that doesn't really bring value. It causes constraints. It adds the need for investment in resources simply to be compliant with regulations. I'm generalizing, but regulations for regulation's sake, this is an opportunity to learn from what we've done in the environment of a crisis where everyone's working together to get products to patients. This is the basis of what we do. Nobody manufactures medicines to keep them in storage. It just doesn't make sense. So yes, that's the first question. The second question.
A risk to vaccine distribution due to dry ice shortages or container shortages.
Yeah, great question. I mean, yeah, dry ice, clearly this is a new challenge. If we're talking about -80 centigrade distribution, this is uncommon, let's say, in current, even in cold chain distribution, which is typically 2 to 8 refrigerated. Dry ice, if you're thinking of re-icing a pack while it's in distribution, clearly would be an added hurdle. I don't think the logistics is there to contemplate that. So that's a new constraint if we're talking about -80 distribution. And the stability data on products may change that as it becomes available, but that constraint would require us to develop a supply chain that, for example, doesn't require repacking. Clearly, that's a tight time constraint in getting the product from manufacturing site to vaccination center. Other packaging constraints, I mentioned glass vials. Alberto touched on the basics of syringes and needles availability at vaccination centers. So yeah, this is unprecedented in terms of volume and scope. And yes, clearly there's a risk of particular items being in short supply. Hence the need for close dialogue, yeah, and collaboration.
Alberto, I have another vaccine question for you, but a different vaccine. Elaine Creekshanks asks, as concerned vaccines, there are a lot of concerns about shortages of flu vaccines, which is of course a risk in combination with COVID-19. What do governments need to do to ensure that they have sufficient supplies of flu vaccines right now?
Well, I mean, it is a question that obviously now is on the media, and we are hearing a lot about it, because to actually mitigate a bit the capacity in the hospital, certainly the more vaccinated population we can have of the flu vaccine, the better. But yeah, I mean, what I can say is that certainly in general, the manufacturers producing flu vaccine are also similar to what is going to happen with the COVID vaccine. When it's there, basically production is increasing the most and the more than is possible. I mean, so we are ramping up, and I believe that in the case, and I can speak here general about the different manufacturers producing the flu vaccine, that is obviously to increase as much as it is possible. And it's a bit of a reflection here on something that also Simon in his part of the presentation mentioned, that in front of the COVID vaccine futures, I mean, when the vaccine, or if the vaccine is approved, probably I better say, and when we have that as a reality in front of us, it is all going to be about how much we can increase capacity. And that is also happening this year with the flu vaccine. I mean, so it is basically try to ramp up as possible. And what I can speak about from a Pfizer perspective, obviously, and speaking about the COVID vaccine, is that we are moving all our resources and capacity availability in trying to be, I mean, to increase as much as possible the volumes that we will be able to produce. So that's what probably would be my answer.
Thanks. We have another question from Emily Faber, who asks, I think this is a question for Lucas. How did the import bans that were implemented by some countries during the crisis, how did those affect your preparedness plan during the pandemic? Did it throw you for a loop?
I'm not aware of import bans. I think the problem were the export bans from China and India. And then, yes, we had in Europe also situations. I don't think it was targeted for pharma products, but it was just the fact that the whole border got congested, and that has delayed our deliveries into countries. I have to say, this has been very effectively addressed through the industry organization, and we could lift, and we could export bans, and also we could establish the green lanes at the border so that medicinal products got prioritized. We had some delays, mainly in Eastern Europe, but that was resolved within a couple of days, so no significant delays due to this. I would like, in that respect, also just to add something on the pharmaceutical strategy, because I think it's important. Although we do not know the finished document yet, I think alone the fact that we have the European Commission looking into it, asking the industry what needs to be done, addressing the topic proactively, I think is absolutely great. And nobody wants to create additional administration, but it's an important dialogue we have to have. Important is, again, that we look at the different type of businesses between the generics business and the innovative medicine, because it is two different drivers of the business, and therefore also requires different solutions. But I think it's a very good thing that we have this dialogue with the European Commission.
Well, it's certainly lots to talk about in this area. Thanks, guys, for a really, really interesting discussion. Obviously, this is such a live issue, and it's really unfolding now, really in the past, present, and future, and isn't going away anytime soon. We're heading toward the end here, so I'd like to pass on the floor to Simon to give us some closing remarks about really what we've concluded here today. And I think in particular, Simon, it would be great to get your thoughts on what are the best policy approaches based on what we've heard here, and what are maybe the policy approaches that might have a detrimental effect on supply chain resilience. So Simon, what are your final thoughts?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. And thanks to each of the speakers for their preparation and their background information. I think it was extremely useful. I think we've got a lot of common points across the different manufacturers and marketing authorization holders. The description of how things are done currently, how the supply chain of pharmaceuticals has developed over the years to become a highly tuned, highly orchestrated, as Alberto mentioned, process, fine-tuned to react, to respond to patient needs, sets the scene of how things are done now. And I think what we haven't done in the past as an industry is to communicate much on this and to make patients and the public generally more aware of our processes in distributing medicines. So, hopefully this is, part of that process now, to increase awareness and knowledge, not only to the public, but to policymakers in particular, so that you mentioned, policies and the future pharma strategy, particularly for Europe. I mean, this must be based on factual information, on knowledge of how things operate now, and on dialogue in which we as industry can discuss and make known what will help and what will not help in terms of making policy. And we touched on some of that. You mentioned the future pharma strategy. The European Parliament resolution of 17th of September outlined more than 120, I think, points of action, including a commissioned study on the root causes of drug shortages. And once the results of the study are known, more fine-tuned actions can be defined, rather than the sort of almost knee-jerk reactions that we might be hearing through the media of, we need to reshore all manufacturing in Europe, or we need to build safety stockpiles in each country. That on the surface seems like a solution, but it might be a false solution to a problem that we haven't actually identified yet fully. So movement restrictions, you asked, what would hinder the process? Export bans, requisitioning, these kind of actions at government level simply put a spanner in the works in terms of that highly tuned distribution process. So I think I've touched on, some of the key points. Probably time is such that we need to wrap up. I think it's been a fantastic reaction and response from the audience. I think we have over 500 participants, which is amazing. It's really good. I mean, thanks for your interest and participation. And just a quick word on, imagine if we had to all travel to one conference center somewhere in Europe and all gather together. Perhaps you're losing my audio.
Yeah, sorry, Simon, you cut out there, but you're back with us now.
Yeah, I was just saying it's great that we've been able to do this virtually with over 500 participants. And, thinking of our carbon footprint that we've saved by not going to a conference center or some nice location. So thanks for the organizers. FPR, we used some Vaccines Europe material as well. FPR clearly set the whole thing up with great support from Acumen consultancy. Sorry about the little technical details. I hope this has been valuable to the participants to at least open the dialogue and help make awareness of the intricacies of pharmaceutical supply. We're all working, as we've said, with one ultimate goal, which is to provide medicines to patients wherever they are in the world. And we want Europe to maintain its key position as a hub in terms of distribution globally, as well as manufacturing, by increasing innovative manufacturing initiatives and incentives to invest in Europe, which clearly we're seeing in the current COVID situation with, two of the leading candidates, let's say, coming from, with AstraZeneca and the German company, biotech firm working with Pfizer. So let's keep that innovation coming in Europe. And we've got a massive task ahead of us in this particular pandemic, and all hopes are on several vaccines becoming available in the coming weeks and months, and supply chains being set up and ready to deal with that sheer capacity, whether it's road, air, ocean, rail. In the end, the last pandemic was more than 100 years ago. The pharmaceutical industry has changed significantly since then, but in the end, we're still putting boxes on ships and trains and trucks. So some things are still pretty similar. I look forward to following up. Don't forget, we've got a session booked on the 12th of November. You can submit questions. You'll be receiving an email after this call. Submit your questions via that link, which will be provided. If we haven't answered your questions here now today, we will strive to do so on the 12th of November. A lot will have happened between now and then. Hopefully we'll have some good news. And we look forward to meeting again on the 12th of November. Thanks everyone again for your input and interest in this session. Take care. Goodbye.